The wind howled through the village of Ashbourne, rattling the windows of the old manor at the edge of town. On a night like this, when the storm clouds rolled in and covered the moon, it was easy to forget that the manor had long been abandoned. No one had dared to approach it for years. The villagers whispered stories of its haunted past, of the phantom that still roamed its halls. But no one truly believed them, at least not until she arrived. Isabella Montgomery, a young woman of exceptional courage and curiosity, was not the type to shy away from such tales. When her uncle, who had lived in the village for most of his life, passed away, Isabella found herself inheriting the manor. She had always known of its eerie reputation, but she had never truly believed in the supernatural. On the evening of her arrival, she could feel the atmosphere of the village shift. There was a tension in the air that she hadn't noticed before, as if the very ground was watching her. The villagers greeted her with polite smiles, but there was an underlying wariness in their eyes. As she made her way to the manor, the clouds parted briefly and a pale beam of moonlight fell upon the structure. The sight of it, standing dark and imposing on the hilltop, made Isabella's heart race, though she couldn't explain why. Inside the manor, the air was stale, thick with dust and forgotten memories. The grand chandelier in the foyer hung by a thread, swaying slightly as the wind crept through the cracks in the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old timbers. Isabella walked through the halls, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. She knew she had to start her life anew here, but the house seemed to resist her presence, as if it did not want to accept her. As the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the house changed. The temperature dropped, and Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. It was then that she heard it, the softest of whispers, barely audible at first, but soon grew louder and more distinct. She turned, looking around, but there was no one in sight. The air was heavy, thick with the sensation of being watched. She couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was in the room with her. The whispers grew louder with each passing minute, as if the walls themselves were alive with secrets. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest as she walked deeper into the manor, following the sound of the voice. It led her to a small, dimly lit room at the end of the hallway. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a forgotten study filled with dust-covered bookshelves. The faint glow of the moonlight illuminated a large portrait hanging on the far wall. The portrait was of a man, his features stern and unyielding. His dark eyes seemed to follow Isabella as she approached, a subtle shift in their gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. The man in the painting looked strikingly familiar, though Isabella couldn't place where she had seen him before. His face seemed to carry a weight of sadness, as if he had been trapped in time, unable to escape his past. The longer she stared at the painting, the more unsettled she became. It was as if the man in the portrait was trying to tell her something, trying to warn her. She reached out a hand to touch the frame, and as her fingers brushed against the cold wood, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind her, trapping her in the room. Isabella spun around, her pulse quickening. The room seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something more ominous. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling her mind with strange, fragmented thoughts. She couldn't make sense of the words, but the tone was clear, urgent, desperate. Before she could react, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the dim light, Isabella saw the figure in the portrait shift. It wasn't just a painting anymore. The man's eyes were no longer fixed on her, but they were alive, watching her every move. His mouth opened, and a low, guttural voice escaped from the portrait, its words chilling. "You shouldn't have come here." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She stumbled backward, her mind racing to make sense of the impossible. The man in the portrait was speaking, his lips had moved, and now his voice echoed in her ears, filling the room with an eerie resonance. The whispers from the shadows seemed to grow in strength, merging with his voice, creating a cacophony of sound that left her dizzy. "Who are you?" Isabella whispered, barely able to breathe. "What do you want from me?" The figure in the portrait didn't answer at first. Instead, his eyes glowed faintly, as if they were drawing her closer. Slowly, his face twisted into a grim smile, one that held no warmth, only malice. "I am the keeper of this place," he said, his voice low and sinister. "And now you are part of it." Suddenly, the walls around her seemed to close in, and the air grew thick, suffocating. The whispers intensified, now mixed with low growls and soft cries. Isabella felt a weight pressed down on her chest as if invisible hands were gripping her heart. She gasped for air, but it was as though the very atmosphere of the house was against her, suffocating her, trapping her within its walls. "Why?" she managed to choke out, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" The man in the portrait gave a low chuckle, and the shadows in the room seemed to twist with his every word. "The curse has been passed down for generations. You have awakened me, and now you will serve as its next vessel. You cannot escape it, no matter how hard you try." Isabella's mind spun as the truth of his words sank in. She had unwittingly become a part of the curse, a prisoner of the very house she had inherited. The portraits on the walls seemed to come alive, their eyes following her every move, their voices blending into a single, unearthly hum that rattled her core. Isabella's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before her. The whispers of the portraits and the shadowy figures that emerged from the walls overwhelmed her senses. The air was so thick with malevolence that it felt as though the house itself was alive, feeding off her fear. The figure in the portrait began to move, slowly stepping out of the frame as if the space within the painting had become a portal. His form was shadowy and indistinct, but Isabella could see his glowing eyes and the twisted smile that spread across his face. "You have awakened the curse," he repeated, his voice now a part of the very walls. "Now, you must pay the price." With every word he spoke, the temperature in the room dropped, and Isabella's breath fogged in the air. She could feel her strength draining, her body growing weaker with each passing moment. The shadows seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with their cold embrace. Panic rose in her chest as she realized that she couldn't escape. The door to the room was locked, and the windows were barred. She was trapped with no way out. The whispers grew louder, and Isabella felt her mind start to slip. It was as if the house was trying to take control of her thoughts, to fill her with the same darkness that had consumed the man in the portrait. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed to her knees, her hands clutching the cold floor as her mind spiraled. The figure in the portrait stood above her now, his form towering over her, his smile widening. His laughter echoed in her ears, filling her with dread. The cold in the room was unbearable. Isabella could feel the icy tendrils of the curse wrap around her, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The figure in the portrait, now free from the canvas, loomed over her, its presence suffocating, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The air was thick with a malignant force, and every breath she took felt like a battle against the suffocating weight of the curse. Her hands trembled as they gripped the floor, trying to steady herself, but the shadows twisted around her, making it difficult to think, to breathe, to move. The whispers in her ears became louder, more insistent. They were no longer just words, they were commands, urges, pulling at the very core of her being. "You belong to this place now," the man's voice echoed through her mind, low and guttural. "You cannot leave. You will never leave." Isabella tried to speak, but her mouth felt frozen, her voice caught in her throat. The weight of the curse pressed down on her, making her feel as though she were sinking, like she was being dragged into an abyss. Her limbs felt heavy, and her thoughts blurred with panic. What was happening to her? Why was she being trapped like this? The man, no, the entity, smiled wickedly as he watched her struggle. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, reflecting the deep malice of the curse that bound them both. He had been waiting for someone like her, someone who dared to uncover the secrets of this manor, someone who had opened the door to the dark forces that had been dormant for so long. "You think you can break the curse?" the figure taunted, his voice echoing through the room. "You think you can escape me? You are already a part of this place, as much as the walls, as much as the floor. You are mine now." Isabella's heart raced in her chest. She had to break free. There had to be a way out. She couldn't give in to this malevolent force. But the more she struggled, the more the shadows seemed to tighten their grip on her. It was as though she was drowning in the darkness, unable to escape, unable to fight. With what little strength she had left, Isabella forced herself to stand. Her legs shook beneath her, but she managed to lift herself, desperate to break free from the suffocating shadows. The whispers became deafening, but she pressed on, pushing herself toward the door. But as she reached the door, the shadows reacted. The air became thick with tension, and the door slammed shut before her, trapping her once again. The force of it sent her sprawling to the floor. "You can't run," the voice sneered. "Not anymore." Isabella struggled to stand again, but her vision was blurred, her mind clouded by fear. The shadows pressed closer, and she could feel them consuming her, trying to take over her very soul. She was losing herself to them, bit by bit. Suddenly, a flash of light burst from the corner of the room, startling Isabella. The shadows recoiled, hissing and retreating. For a moment, she could see the figure, the cursed man, in all his terrifying glory. He was tall, gaunt, his face a mask of twisted sorrow and rage. His eyes burned with the fire of 1,000 forgotten souls. He stepped toward her, but his form began to waver, flickering like a candle in the wind. You are not part of this place," Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse. She could feel the pull of something deep inside her, a force that was beginning to fight back. It wasn't just fear, it was defiance. Something inside her was fighting the curse. The figure let out a guttural growl, the shadows swirling violently around him. "You will never defeat me." Isabella's heart raced in her chest, but now there was a spark of defiance that pushed her forward. She took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the room intensify, but something inside her shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a sense of knowing. The curse that had bound this place, this manor, for centuries, it wasn't invincible. There was a way to fight it. She had heard rumors, whispers in the village, of an ancient book hidden within the manor. A book that could break any curse. It was said to be locked away, guarded by the spirits of those who had been claimed by the manor's dark power. But Isabella had no time to waste. She had to find that book, or she would be lost to the shadows forever. The figure in the portrait watched her closely, his glowing eyes narrowing. The shadows recoiled from Isabella as she stepped back, but they quickly regrouped, swirling menacingly around her. "You think you can break the curse? You think you can destroy me?" The voice of the man was filled with venom. "You are a fool." But Isabella's resolve only grew stronger. She turned away from the figure, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of the book. She noticed the bookcase in the far corner, half hidden behind an old curtain. With trembling hands, she approached it, hoping that it wasn't too late. The moment her hand touched the shelf, a cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The shadows seemed to gather, pressing in on her, but Isabella refused to back down. She pulled at the shelf, and to her relief, it moved. There, hidden behind layers of dust and cobwebs, was the ancient tome. It was bound in black leather, its pages yellowed with age. The title, written in a strange, forgotten language, seemed to glow faintly. Isabella could feel its power pulsing beneath her fingertips. "Give it to me," the figure hissed, but Isabella ignored him. She opened the book, the pages crackling as they turned. As her eyes scanned the text, she felt an overwhelming surge of knowledge. The book was teaching her how to undo the curse. But she had to act quickly, time was running out. Isabella's hands shook as she read the ancient incantation. The words were foreign to her, but their meaning became clear in her mind. She could feel the magic thrumming through the air, filling her with an energy she had never known. The book was alive in her hands, its power coursing through her, urging her to finish the ritual. But the shadows, sensing her power, began to lash out. They shrieked, their voices merging with the whispers of the manor, growing louder and more frantic. The figure in the portrait twisted and writhed, his face contorting in agony. "No," he cried, his voice breaking. "You cannot do this. You belong to me now. You cannot escape." Isabella's heart pounded as she raised her hands, the book still open in front of her. The shadows swirled violently, rushing toward her, but she stood firm. She spoke the incantation aloud, her voice steady and unwavering. With each word, the shadows began to falter. The air grew heavy with energy, and the manor itself seemed to shake. The very walls groaned, as if they were waking from a long, dark slumber. The figure in the portrait screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the growing force. The ground beneath Isabella's feet cracked, and a bright light erupted from the book. The shadows recoiled, but the light was too strong. It enveloped her, and she felt herself being pulled into the light. For a moment, she thought she would be consumed, but then silence. Isabella opened her eyes. The world around her had shifted. The shadows were gone, replaced by the soft glow of daylight streaming through the cracked windows of the manor. The air no longer felt thick with malice. In fact, it felt lighter, fresher. The figure in the portrait was gone. Isabella stood in the center of the room, breathing deeply. Her heart still raced, but it was no longer from fear. It was from triumph. She had done it. She had broken the curse that had plagued this place for centuries. The manor was free. But as she looked around the room, she noticed something strange. The walls, once filled with portraits and dark images, were now bare. The bookshelves were empty. The entire house seemed hollow, as if it had lost its spirit. It was as if the curse had not only affected the house itself, but had also taken away everything that once belonged to it. The manor was no longer haunted. It was empty of the life that had once filled its halls. Isabella knew that this was not the end of the story. She had freed the house, but she had also unleashed something else. The shadows had been bound to this place, and now that they were gone, they would seek a new home. They would find someone new to claim. Isabella shivered at the thought, but she was no longer afraid. The curse was broken, and she had emerged victorious. But as she turned to leave, she heard a faint whisper behind her, one that made her blood run cold. Isabella froze. The whisper was faint, but it was unmistakable. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The room behind her was empty, the walls bare, the air still. Yet, she could feel the presence of someone, just beyond her reach. The whisper grew louder, almost imperceptible but clear. You think you've won? The curse is never gone. It lingers, waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. The figure, the entity, the curse, it wasn't over. It had followed her. Isabella knew in that instant that while she had broken the physical bonds of the curse, the spirit of it still clung to her, seeking revenge. She stepped back, a cold sweat forming on her brow. The house, now free of shadows, seemed to tremble under the weight of the remaining malevolent force. She could feel it in the very air around her, thick and suffocating. It wanted her to understand that there was no escape. The curse had been passed down for centuries, and it would never be truly broken. It would always return to claim its own. I am always here, the whisper continued. You will never be free of me. Isabella took another step back, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The room was empty, just as it had been moments before. But she could feel it, the weight of the unseen presence, the watchful eyes that hovered just beyond her vision. Her heart raced as she turned and ran, her feet pounding against the cold wooden floor. She rushed toward the door, the air seeming to grow thicker with each step, the shadows creeping back toward her like a tidal wave. She could hear the whisper again, growing louder, more urgent. You can never leave. Not now. Not ever. Isabella slammed the door open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. She wasn't safe. Not anymore. As Isabella fled down the stairs, she felt the house itself seem to move, as if the walls were closing in on her. The whispering was everywhere now, louder than before, coming from all directions. She could barely think, the noise and pressure overwhelming her senses. Her hand fumbled for the doorknob, but it slipped from her grasp, and the door slammed shut with a deafening sound. She turned to find the hallway shifting, as if the manor was reconfiguring itself, closing off the way she had come. No, 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 Isabella shouted, panic rising in her throat. Let me out. The whispers were now screaming in her mind, their voices frantic, accusing, pulling her deeper into the manor's grip. The temperature dropped, and Isabella could see her breath misting in the air, the chill seeping into her bones. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow, twisting and writhing like serpents, their forms shifting with every passing second. The ghostly presence, once just a voice, had taken shape again. It was no longer confined to the portrait, but now it was a full manifestation, a figure cloaked in darkness, with glowing eyes that bore into her soul. The curse had followed her, but now it was stronger than ever. She had broken it once, but the true essence of the curse had always been there, lying dormant, waiting to rise again. You cannot escape me, the figure said in a voice that was both cold and mocking. You are mine. This house, this curse, it will never let you go. Isabella collapsed to her knees, her mind spiraling. She had tried to fight it, to break free, but it had all been in vain. The curse was not something that could be defeated so easily. It was a part of this place, and now it was a part of her. In her final moments, as the darkness consumed her, Isabella realized the truth. The manor had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many before. She was now bound to the curse, trapped within its walls forever. And the whispering would never stop. The house stood silent once more, its walls empty. But the curse was not gone, it would linger, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in and awaken it again.